Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's a review for Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 6. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one season at a time. In this video I will be covering all the episodes of Season 6 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So, with Season 6 of Deep Space Nine, I think I've said before that this may be the best season of Deep Space Nine. I think I was going back and forth between whether or not it was Season 6 or Season 3 that was the best season of Deep Space Nine. I think after watching Season 6, I think I can say definitively Season 6 is the best season of Deep Space Nine. It barely beats Season 3. In fact, I do believe Season 6 maybe possibly could be the best season of the entire Star Trek franchise, because it just gels. I think this season, more than any other, shows that the writers of the show really just found their niche and really got into the groove. And not just that, is that they could come up with original ideas and take the show in different directions and unusual directions and take risks that a lot of other Star Trek shows, Voyager, just were too cowardly to take, and just go into really new directions and take risky directions and just do. And granted, there were a lot of controversial episodes because of that, but for the most part, I think most people would agree that Season 6 of Deep Space Nine was an amazing season of Deep Space Nine. And I say this even though Season 6 features what may be my least favorite episode, or the worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. That's in Season 6. And Season 6 introduced my most hated character of the entire Star Trek franchise, Vic Fontaine. But despite those things, I still think that Season 6 was an amazing season, and because the positives outweigh the negatives. Now, that's not to say that every single episode was pure gold. It wasn't, as I alluded to. There definitely were some stinkers this season, but I think the good outweighed that. And it's so mind-boggling for me to think that Season 6 aired the same year that Season 4 of Voyager aired. Season 4 of Voyager is another one of my favorite seasons of all time. And I talked about this when I did my Season 5 video, because Season 5 DS9 aired at the same time as Season 3 of Voyager, and those two seasons I thought dropped in quality at the same time. But then this year, both shows released the best season of the show at the same time. So it's something in the Star Trek leadership just really gelled, just really worked. Now, it's funny though, because I think both Season 6 of Deep Space Nine and Season 4 of Voyager, both amazing seasons, had a stronger start and middle than they did end. Towards the end of the season, both shows, I wouldn't say got bad, but they got kind of more average, more like an average season, as opposed to the amazing blow you away season that the first part of the season was. But I don't think that, as I said, I don't think that overall hurt the season. Overall, I was, especially on this rewatching Season 6, I was extremely impressed. Now, I'll tell you something a little personal. When both these seasons of, Season 6 of Deep Space Nine and Season 7 of Voyager came out, I believe it was 97 through 98. Those were my party years. I think I was 18, 19. That's when I was hanging out with friends, getting into mischief, getting drunk, and whatnot. So unfortunately, I actually didn't watch most of these episodes when they first came out. A lot of them I had to see years later, because I was out having a life, so to speak. Thank God I don't have one of those anymore. But anyway, so it's funny because, so the two best years of both these shows, I actually didn't catch most of it when it first came out. Like all of Next Generation and the first like 3 or 4 seasons of Deep Space Nine. Like I caught every single episode the moment it aired. I recorded it, put it on videotape, watched it multiple times. But by the time it got to this season, I wasn't recording it anymore. Sometimes I would watch it if I got the chance. Like I think the opening 6 episode arc, which oh my god, it's amazing. I'll get into this shortly. I don't even think I still caught every episode of that. I think I missed a couple of episodes of that when it first came out. And I missed some great episodes I love, like Change of Heart. I missed that when it first came out. I missed Profit and Lace when it first came out, which wasn't so misfortunate. But I did catch into Pale Moonlight when that first came out, and I was quite, shall we say, intoxicated at the time, and I actually made me enjoy it even more. I was completely blown away by that episode. Anyway, enough preamble. Let's go ahead and get into the episodes of Season 6, and let's start with A Time to Stand. Now, I think I mentioned before there's this website I was reading at the time these episodes came out called, they wrote articles, I think it was called The Cynic's Corner. They were actually quite harsh on both Season 6 of Deep Space Nine and Season 6 of Voyager. I think in retrospect most people wouldn't be, but I think when the episodes first air, people tend to be a lot more harsh on there. So just bear that in mind for future shows that are currently on that you might be watching. But anyway, so I always remember that because that website Cynic's Corner referred to this episode as A Time Too Bland. A time, like it's too bland, get it? Ha ha ha. Well, I don't know if I'd agree with that. Because I think a lot of people were disappointed in this episode when it first came out, including myself, because we're used to the typical Star Trek season premiere, where there was a cliffhanger at the season finale, and the premiere is supposed to be the awesome, action-packed resolution that solves everything, and this was just like a continuation. It reminds me, like looking at it in retrospect, comparing to modern shows, it reminds me of a Game of Thrones season premiere. That it's not very interesting in on itself, and it's kind of just there to set things up and to get things going in the future, because it's more about telling a long-term story arc. And this is weird for Star Trek. Star Trek fans weren't used to this. So I think at the time a lot of people were really disappointed in this episode because they were expecting a big resolution, but instead they just showed this new status quo of having the Dominion run Deep Space Nine, or Terra Nor as they were now calling it once again, while Sisko and the others were trying to go on missions for Starfleet during the war with the Dominion. Now, watching this in retrospect, knowing that, it makes me appreciate this episode a lot more, because I love the fact that they just simply didn't just resolve everything in the first episode. I know I did read articles after the Season 5 finale that they were going to continue the storyline with the Dominion running the station for several episodes. That wasn't just going to be over with straight away, that they were planning on doing a long-term arc. Now this is groundbreaking, I think this is pretty much unheard of in a Star Trek show. I mean, there were a few science fiction shows that were doing this at the time, but this is pretty groundbreaking, and it was probably, as I said, like the Rick Berman and the producers and all them were focusing more on Voyager, so the showrunners of Deep Space Nine could get away with something like this, because Voyager, remind you, at the same exact time, Season 4, they had suggested to do a season-long story arc of the Year of Hell, and they got shot down. The brass, Rick Berman, never said, no, you can't do that, it has to be episodic. And it's funny that at the exact same time they got shot down, Deep Space Nine was able to do their own long-term story arc, although it wasn't season-long, it was only 6 episodes, and I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I think on the one hand, I was glad that they didn't stretch out them retaking Deep Space Nine for too long, and that they waited for 6 episodes. But on the other hand, part of me thinks that there's more storytelling opportunities, and this would have been better if they stretched it out longer. Maybe not an entire season. It probably would have got tiresome after like 26 episodes, but I think they could have stretched it out more than 6 episodes. But anyway, getting back to A Time to Stand in particular, like, when I remember this episode, I try to think about, was it any good? I always think about that mission to destroy the Ketracel White resupply area, where the Cisco and Garrett go on the Jim Hadar ship, and they have those little funky Google Glass looking things on the view screens things, and I don't think very highly of that storyline. I mean, it's okay, but it's kind of throwaway, and that's kind of the problem I have. And this is brought up in this episode. I think I mentioned the Call to Arms as well. Main issue I have, and I'm sorry, but I can't help but to keep harping on it for the whole Dominion takeover story arc, particularly this episode, is that in the Call to Arms, they knew the Cardassian and Dominion fleet was coming to take Deep Space Nine, which controlled, so they could take down the mines that were mining the wormhole. And Cisco says, "Oh, we can't have backup because the Starfleet, the fleets are too busy, and trust me, they're doing something important." And then, so at the very end of Call to Arms, you see this huge ass fleet. I remember we were so excited, and me and my friends were talking about, "Did you see that fleet?" It was all these Starfleet ships, all these Klingon ships. It's people watching this in modern times, maybe younger people might not be aware, but in the 90s, this is the first time we ever seen anything like this in Star Trek. You see it in Star Wars, but on the big screen, but not on a small screen show like this. And Star Trek, up to this point, it was like Next Generation, where it was just one ship and two ships, and they're sitting there going. Now, granted, we did get a bit more spectacular ship battles in season 4 of Deep Space Nine, but still, this is the first time where we saw this huge ass fleet of Starfleet and Klingon ships. And then this episode opens, and you see that same fleet. In fact, I think they purposely tried to mirror the shot at the end of Call to Arms, where you see the same Klingon Federation fleet, but they're all destroyed. They're being tractor beams, they got holes in them, they're on fire, and just to illustrate that they got their ass kicked. So this brings me back to my point about the sorry, the fleets are too busy to help Deep Space Nine. Is because they're off destroying these shipyards. Well, destroying those shipyards seem to amount to dick. And in this episode, they even talked about how it starts off with Bashir and Garrick and Cisco all talking about how they're fucked, how they're losing the war very badly, how the Federation are going to be screwed, and it looks like the Dominion is going to win the war. So what's the point of destroying those fucking shipyards if it doesn't mean anything? If 2 months later the Federation's losing the war, it seems like it would have been way more fucking important to protect Deep Space Nine, which is the mouth of the wormhole. If they take down the minefields, and that's the whole thing, and we'll get to towards the end of this arc, if they take down the minefields, then the Dominion automatically wins the war. It's we're won, because they have all these reinforcements that will just overwhelm Starfleet, and they will not be able to defend against. So that makes it, bar none, hands down, the most critical strategic location in the entire war, hands down, not even slightly more strategically important. No, it's a billion times more strategically important than any stupid shipyards to count the bullshit. So realistically, they never should have abandoned Deep Space Nine. They should have threw everything they had. In fact, that's what they do in Sacrifice of Angels. So why didn't they do that to fucking protect Deep Space Nine? You think the minefields would last forever once they have control of it? And the fact that they're being... Anyway. They were being so obtuse about, I don't know, maybe we should protect it. Oh, come on, you lose the war. So this the war, the Dominion War, has this presented in this 6-episode story arc, has no strategic value to it. It doesn't come. It's not very realistic, and the Starfleet absolutely sucks at strategy. There's no the writers didn't even give any thought about it. It's just, oh, we want Deep Space Nine to be taken over by the Dominion, so let's have this happen. Oh, we want the Federation, Starfleet, to be losing the war, so we can raise the stakes, so let's have that happen. It's all like contrived writing. So that does bother me a bit. Now, getting back to this episode. As I said, I thought about the Catch Yourself White thing. That annoys me because that never comes into play later. Because in this episode, they presented that we strike a blow against the Dominion because we destroy their supply of Catch Yourself White. That means the Jem'Hadar are going to go, crazy and kill everyone. So I thought that was like raising the stakes. That was actually the Federation fighting back. But then after this episode, they kind of dismiss it as like, Dominion just found another source to Catch Yourself White, and so they're going to have it, so let them have it, who cares, whatever, blah, 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 blah. So this whole thing's a waste of time. So why do I, just like the shipyards that those other fleets destroy, why do I give a fuck about the Cisco trying to destroy the Catch Yourself White when we know it accounts to jack shit in the future? But anyway, I do like this episode, though, because particularly for the Deep Space Nine or the Terok Nor storyline with Kira and Odo. In fact, I think for the most part, in my opinion, the what's going on Terok Nor during this takeovers, to me, that's the more interesting part of this whole 6 episode story arc. I think it's more interesting for the most part than the Cisco stuff. Which is what I tend to gravitate more to. In this episode in particular, it has this amazing scene. And first of all, it really sets the stage to what the new dynamic is. How it shows Jake, and he's a reporter and trying to get an interview with Weyoun, but Weyoun's not letting him because he doesn't like what he has to say, but they're still not imprisoning him. And it shows that Weyoun's trying to, talk to Odo, and Odo doesn't want to talk to him, and Kira kind of convinces him to use the power that Odo has over him to influence Weyoun to get the security team back. And it shows that Weyoun has absolute control over Dukat, because I love that scene where Dukat, Kira's like, oh, let's get the Bajoran force back on the station. And Dukat's like, no. And Weyoun's like, no, sorry, nothing I can do. But Odo shows up and it's like, I want the Bajoran security force back in the station. And Weyoun's like, done. And when Dukat tries to argue, he's like, I don't think so. He's like, shut up, Dukat! I'm in charge here. If Odo wants it done, it's done. So it's an interesting dynamic there. And the one scene I really loved was the scene where Dukat confronts Kira in his office, and he's basically creeping on her, and he's hitting on her, and Kira is starts to get really pissed off. What the fuck do you expect to happen? Do you actually expect me to fall in love with you? You're a freaking serial killer, megalomaniac. Why the fuck? And then he's like, oh, you will, and he touches her cheek, and it shows the kind of power and control, and that's textbook sexual harassment there, but it's the kind of control that he has over her, and he knows that she's powerless, and he's taking pure delight. I think this is some of these episodes, and this one is including some of these episodes, really have Gul Dukat as his best, as the best that the show has ever used. And Gul Dukat, I still think, is probably the best villain in all of Star Trek, and this series of episodes in particular use him the absolute best, and this episode is no exception. They really do a great job making him a despisable but believable and dynamic villain that you love to hate. So I do think overall this is still a really good episode, even though I wouldn't say it's absolutely great, but it definitely does its job well of setting up the whole story arc here. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is Rocks and Shoals, however you pronounce that. So this is when Cisco and everyone, the Defiant crew who's on the Jem'Hadar ship, they crash on the planet and they're trapped with these Jem'Hadar, and the Vorta is running out of Catch Yourself White, and so he's being very devious and trying to make a deal with Cisco, while Cisco tries to reason with the Jem'Hadar first or third, because the first and second died, and the Vorta doesn't like him, so he stays the third, even though he's effectively in charge. And Sisko tries to reason with him, like, look, this Vord is despicable. He's trying to betray you. He wants you dead, but the Jem'Hadar refuses to betray the Vord, even though he knows definitely isn't worthy of the loyalty he's being shown. And so Sisko and the others are forced to kill them. And it was so. Now this episode reminds me a lot of the 5th season episode, The Ship, where Sisko and Jadzia and O'Brien and Worf are like trapped on a planet and on the Jem'Hadar ship, and there's a standoff between like the Jem'Hadar and Vorda and Sisko and his crew. And honestly, I think so. The 2 episodes are really similar, but honestly, I think this is the better version of that, because I talked about how the ship, like, it was an okay episode, but I don't think they did enough with the premise, and for the most part it was just them on the Sisko and the others whining and complaining, we're tired, blah blah, featuring some overacting. Whereas this episode, I thought they did a lot more with the premise. Like, I love the interactions between Jadzia, where she is like injured and they make this joke about a hotel. Like, that was a nice human touch. And the interplay between Garrick and Nog was great. How, because Garrick tried to kill Nog in Pak Nor, so Nog was afraid of him, and how they get captured, and the stuff that Garrick was trying to say once he was captured. I love Garrick. And in the interactions between, like, the tense situation between the Jem'Hadar and Sisko, the Starfleet forces, was also a hell of a lot more interesting. It was a much more interesting dynamic. You had this despicable Vorda who was like, look, I'm gonna make the Jem'Hadar attack you regardless of what you say, but if you agree to my terms, then I'll tell you where they are so you can kill them easily. I mean, and Sisko doesn't want to do that, but he's forced to because the Jem'Hadar is too honorable, and that's or too conditioned, depending on how you look at it, and that's such a more interesting dynamic. And plus, this is a really good location shoot as well. I like the Star Trek doesn't really do the Deep Space Nine in particular doesn't do the location shoots that frequently, but this was a very interesting landscape that they had here to have the storyline play out. So I thought this is actually a much better version of the ship. I thought, and of course it plays into at the Deep Space Nine storyline, or Tarek Noor storyline. You had the storyline of the protest. I mean, God, that was so powerful, where the Bajorn Vedic went to stage a protest, and Kira's like, oh, you're only going to make things worse, so we have to stop her. And she goes, and the protest is just her hanging herself. Although there are some technical issues like this, because the hanging, why didn't anyone go? They could have saved her life, They could have ran to her and, like, held her up, or someone could have went above on the second level and cut the rope, and they could have rushed her to the Inferno and saved her life. But whatever. Leave all that aside. That was still very powerful moment, and the moment, the effect it had on Kira, and how she realized that they had to start a resistance, so that they couldn't just getting by is not good enough, and how she felt like a collaborator. I mean, that played on the really interesting dynamic there. So overall, I do think this is a great episode. So anyway, let's move to the next episode, which is Sons and Daughters, and unfortunately, this is a bad episode. This kind of taints the 6th episode story arc. And I know some people, I've heard some people, and I think I used to do this myself, when they say their favorite episodes, they put the entire, like, station takeover story arc as a tie, like this, all these 6 episodes. But I like really even Sons and Daughters, because Sons and Daughters, this is a bad episode. I'm sorry. Like, the whole concept of bringing back Alexander, I mean, I'm okay with them bringing back Alexander, but bringing him back as a Klingon, like, warrior, and he was like this total fuck up, and he it has all this teenage angst about his father. I mean, that was so uninteresting. Oh, you abandoned daddy, abandonment issues. Not that that storyline can't be done well. It's done well all the time when Lost, but it wasn't done particularly well here. It was just unbelievable, and it was more unbelievable the fact that Alexander wanted to become a Klingon warrior, joined up for the Klingon military. I think that is the most ridiculous, the stupidest thing they could have done with this storyline. I know they try to make excuses for this. They try to address this by having Worf say, "Oh, I'm surprised. You said you rejected everything, Klingon. So what you're doing here?" So they tried to address the fact that it's so out of place for him. But that doesn't help. That doesn't make it any less out of place for them. The fact that they acknowledge that it's out of place for him, they try to make excuses for, oh, it's because of his daddy abandonment issues. Bullshit. I'm sorry, that's stupid. They just wanted some bullshit way to bring Alexander back and have him in the Klingon storyline because they needed something to do. Because they set up at the end of season 5 that Worf and Martok would be off on their ships, so they were going to have a Klingon story, which I was looking forward to because I love Soldiers of the Empire, but it clear to me that they couldn't really come up with anything, and so they came up with this bullshit to bring Alexander, and plus the fact that Alexander was such a fuck up, and everyone was making fun of him. I mean, it seems like they try to play this for comedy or try to make it like a good thing, but how is that a good thing? He's just not suited to be in a Klingon military. It's very clear. So why is he? He had no interest in being and the end of Next Generation, they set him up that he was going to be the Federation ambassador. So this should have followed that storyline. They should have had some storyline with him. Maybe he could have joined Starfleet. That actually would have made a lot more sense than him joining the Federation. Or he could have been on the ambassadorial team or like an apprentice ambassador or something like that. Would have been a fuck ton and much more interesting and in character. This is bull. And the fact that they aged up this character and they used the Klingon. Oh, it's the Klingons age faster. The age old sci-fi excuse when you want to age people up. They just say, oh, they're aliens and they age faster, which probably never mentioned that before again. And it's just bullshit excuse to have him in the episode. And he shouldn't be that old. He shouldn't be in that character. He shouldn't be a moron. He shouldn't be doing this. The interactions between Worf and plus you get there's a very classic moronic line in this episode where Martok goes to Worf and it's oh, when a father and son don't speak, that means there's trouble between them. Duh. What the fuck is wrong with you, Martok? That's the dumbest thing to say. So this episode is just bad on every level. Almost every level, because you also have the storyline with Zial and Gul Dukat. That was actually a good storyline. As I said, the stuff that was going on the station during the story arc was actually always the better storyline. So that was the saving grace for this episode. That's why I wouldn't say this is one of the worst episodes, is because the stuff with Dukat and Zial was actually really interesting, and how Dukat was trying to use Zial to get to Kira and try to get with Kira by using his daughter. I love the scene where he buys Kira this dress and Kira's oh, this is the dress, and she realizes what she's doing. She's what the fuck am I doing? This is from Dukat. She takes it back and she's I can't take this to Dukat. I'm not coming to your dinner because we're not going to be friends. Fuck you. And she leaves, and then Zial walks in and sees Dukat holding the dress, and he's oh, I got this for you. That's just such a great Dukat moment. She's kind of person that he is. So anyway, yes, overall, not a very good episode. But I wouldn't say it's one of the worst because of the Zial stuff. But anyway, let's get over to the next episode, which is Behind the Lines, which I have always put in my top 10s, my top 20s, and I think this is a highly underrated episode, actually, because this episode is amazing. Now again, it's better for the storyline that's taking place on the station, because off the station, the storyline of Dax becoming the captain of the Defiant because Sisko got promoted to an office job where he's studying strategy. That was okay. Don't get me wrong. I had nothing against that storyline. It was fine, but the storyline on the station was fucking amazing. Where, especially like that opening scene where you see Rom and Kira like in the second level of Quark's bar looking down Damar and the Jem'Hadar, and they tell the story about how they stole Damar's pad and put it where the Dominion could find it, where he had his plan about how they should just kill the Jem'Hadar if they run out of Catcher Cell White, and it starts a bar fight, and like you see like the Jem'Hadar like smash and kill Cardassians and crack their backs, and the Cardassians like start stabbing and they're like killing each other in this, and the look on Kira and Rom's face are like, holy fuck. They knew they were going to start a fight, but they had no idea it was going to be that bloody. Like, that was a powerful scene. And you move into that and you get the resistance cell where Odo is like saying, he's pissed off about this, how dare you, this is stupid, you shouldn't do shit like that, in the future we should collaborate. And then they introduce the storyline of Damar being able to figure out how to take down the minefield. And I think you get an amazing scene, probably one of the best scenes in the show, where Quark shows up drunk, and he's like, I was just having Kanar with Damar, that rhymes! And he's like drunk out of his mind, but he's trying to tell Kira, Odo, and Rom and the resistance cell that Damar's going to take down the minefield. So he eventually gets it out that that's what they're going to do, and so that's such a great scene. And so they figure out that they need to, that is urgent, because then if they take down the minefield, the war's over, Federation lost. So they definitely need to do something about it. So they come up with a plan. Rom's going to sneak in and sabotage. But then he also had a storyline where the female changeling has come to the station, and Odo, she's like, link with me, Odo, poor Odo. And Kira can tell that his loyalties are becoming divided, and so she makes him promise not to link with her, but then she like talks him into it, and then so he's too busy linking and shit. And I still, for one, reject the notion that the changelings linking is a sexual experience. I think Odo even described it as sexual at one point, but I mean that's their natural state. So as all the changelings are in this, so you telling me the Great Link is one giant orgy? I don't think so. I think it's a bit different than that. But anyway, I'm getting a bit off topic. Regardless, it just was more of an alien thing. It shows how Odo was losing himself. It was so powerful. He just lets Rom get arrested. And Kira comes in and yells at him. And he's like, doesn't really matter anymore. I don't care. You're all small now. I mean, that was powerful. And I totally bought that. I think they really earned the fact that Odo would completely turn and become the traitor because of his connection to his people and his desire to be with his people. That was such a great, powerful moment. I do believe this is one of the best episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. Anyway, so then we get into the next episode, which is Favor the Bold. Now, many people, including myself up until I rewatched it recently, think of this episode as just a setup episode. And in fact, sometimes it's hard for me to differentiate what happens in Favor the Bold, what happens in Sacrifice of Angels, because really it's two halves of the same part, where Favor the Bold's the first half and Sacrifice of Angels the second half. Of course, they all contribute to the 6-episode story arc, but these two episodes in particular feel like they're one story stretched over 2 episodes. Because this is the story where we get Sisko saying, I have a plan to retake Deep Space Nine. It's just an awesome classic line. And I think this episode, watching it again, I realize it's not just a setup episode. It's an amazing setup episode. It's like the best kind of setup episode you could possibly have. I mean, it does have the issue of not being completely standalone because it's totally dependent on what happens in the following episode, but you leave that aside and you look at it more of a serialized story arc. This does the best job it possibly can. And in fact, in some ways, actually, some of the stuff that happens in this episode is better than Sacrifice of Angels because it does such a good job of ramping up the tension, of getting you really excited for wanting the Starfleet to finally retake Deep Space Nine, and things coming to a head, of course, because Damar is taking down the minefield, and then so you have the impending doom. It's like, one of the greatest like ticking clock moments like ever. And and I love how, they found out that DeMar was getting the minefield done earlier. I love how Morn was the guy they used to get a message to Cisco, and he goes, Admiral Ross, and they're like, oh, we have to go now. What about the Ninth Fleet or whatever? Screw them. What about the Klingons? Screw them too. We gotta go. And this is what I was like talking about earlier about how they're finally emphasizing here that the important, like, if they don't get Deep Space Nine back, they lose the war, which makes me, again, this sort of criticism about how the earlier part of this 6 episode story arc that or really it's 7 if you count Call to Arms, but anyway, how they were being very poor at strategy. This is very bad strategizing. And like the thing when Cisco goes to the Admiral, and the Admiral's like, oh, well, what about Earth? And Cisco points out, well, Earth isn't the most important real estate, it's Deep Space Nine. Why didn't they say this before? Why they finally come to this realization, oh, right, if we don't get Deep Space Nine, we're going to lose the war. They finally come to this realization when they're at the 11th hour, when it was right about to be too late, when they were all going to be fucked, because they didn't come to this realization before. They should have came to this realization in the first place. Hey, dumbasses, who gives a shit about these stupid shipyards? Who gives a shit about your home worlds? Who gives a shit about Earth? Who gives a shit about anything? The Deep Space Nine is the number one most important real estate, because you automatically lose the war if you lose that minefield. But whatever. I know I keep harping on that point, but seriously. But at least in this episode, they finally realize that even if they are a bit too late, and they throw everything that they have at, and of course Gowron's being an idiot, but I totally buy that, because Gowron has constantly been portrayed as an idiot, so Worf Martok had to go to him to try to convince him to join in their fight, and so you have this really amped up storyline, and then you get like Odo, the more traction with the Odo storyline. Odo goes to Kira and starts to realize what a dick he was and tries to apologize, but she's like, fuck you, we are way past sorry. Like, that was all amazing good stuff. So this is a really great episode. So it leads into Sacrifice of Angels, which I actually, watching this episode again, I realized I don't think I give this episode enough credit. I think I put it in my top 10 when I did my top 10 Deep Space Nine episodes, and it totally deserves to be there. And when I did my top 25 Deep Space start episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, this was like in the top 50. It didn't make the top 25. I think I needed to adjust that. I think this deserved to be in the top 25. This episode is amazing, and I think it gets a lot more slack than it deserves. I think this is one, like, just everything, like the whole craft. This is kind of the main thing I'm talking about when I'm talking about the showrunners of the show have really they really clicked, they really gelled, they decided, like, the writing, the acting, the editing, cinematography, like the editing in this episode is beautiful, like the way everything intercuts to ramp up the tension, and like so much happens in this episode, but it never feels plot heavy. It always feels based in the characters, and it has a lot to do with the writing and the acting. You always get the feeling that the characters are the center, even like in these grand ass space battles. And I have to say, talking about the space battles, to me, this is much better than Best of Both Worlds. When I did my Best of Both Worlds review, I talked about, yeah, it's decent for Next Generation, but Next Generation's not really known for space battles. And later Star Trek series where they had bigger budgets, or it was easier to do special effects like this, they do much better, like, battle episodes, and Next Generation's better at drama, like The Inner Light and stuff like that. And yes, there's Enterprise, because that's more drama based and is action based, where Best of Both Worlds is like this action suspense, and it's decent, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's one of the best episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. I think this episode way outdoes it. My opinion, of course, like the space battles, and it's because Best of Both Worlds is like, oh, there's a space battle happening off screen, we just see the aftermath. Ooh. Here we see, like, It is like the most epic space battle ever done in Star Trek, where it's a massive fleet, because as I said, Sisko's convinced Starfleet to throw everything they have at getting Deep Space Nine, and the Dominion knows this, so they threw everything they had, and their fleet was like twice the size of this massive. So you just got ships everywhere. You see Galaxy class starships like fighting Cardassian ships, and Jem'Hadar coming to attack another galaxy. And you see those little Maquis Raider ships, whatever, like coming to raid, like look like starfighters. This was such a great. And if you notice, like throughout, they must have like spent tons of money on that on this shot, because throughout the rest of Deep Space Nine, they reuse a lot of these shots. You see a lot of them in the final episode, What You Leave Behind. What You Leave Behind. You definitely see a lot of these shots from Sacrifice of Angels. So they must have threw a lot of money, but a lot of the shots you see here are original. And it's just a glorious. Sorry, I got a bit distracted by that. But it was, but even throughout that glorious space battle, it wasn't like just, ships fighting. You had the character story of Sisko. You felt the character story of Sisko. Even other people in the fight, like Bashir, O'Brien, you felt their fear. You felt the urgency. And at the same time, again, they really played that the Deep Space Nine, or the Tarek Noor, if you will, storyline to really great effect. We got the final word. Damar convinces Dukat to arrest everyone in the resistance cell, and then Quark comes in and breaks them out. And that was such a great scene where Quark is like, has to shoot the two Jem'Hadar, and he's like, ah! And he couldn't believe that he just killed two Jem'Hadar. He's just stuck there, and Jake has to sort of pull him away. Absolutely amazing. And as I said, the way that this was edited, the way they intercut between all these different scenes, like rapidly, like especially towards the end, they intercut with Rom trying to take down the Tarek Noor weapons, and Dukat and Wayun trying to activate the Wayne field, and the ship battles, and Martok and Worf showing it. Like the way they intercut between all these different scenes was so amazing. It was so well done. Like it was just bloom, bloom, clip, clip, clip. And as I said, like it feels like a lot happens, but it feels natural to the characters, because you get you get everything. You get the Worf showing up with the Klingons to save the day. You get a lot of cool interactions between Dukat and Wayne. I mean, this episode has everything. I mean, this was like the perfect, conclusion, follow-up to this Dominion takeover story, and this was what really makes it good, in my opinion. That's why, like, I did this countdown with my brother and Phil from Philly Issues Guy a couple years ago, where we took the top 5 rated episodes on IMDb of each Star Trek series, and we ranked it 25. And Call to Arms was in there, and Sacrifice of Angels was not. And so me and my brother didn't have Call to Arms ranked very high, and Phil was very upset because he had it ranked at number 2, because I think he was like taking it for the whole Dominion takeover story arc. And we were both saying, like, yeah, but Call to Arms isn't really that good. It's just setting up the story arc. It's Sacrifice of Angels should have been there. If Sacrifice of Angels was in there, then I would have had it at my number 2. Because Sacrifice of Angels is amazing. Now, I know a lot of people, and I did a full-length review for it. You can check it out where I talked about this more. But the reason why some people don't hold this episode in high esteem and hold it back is because they consider the ending with the prophets a Deus Ex Machina, where they just show up, the gods show up and save the day and erase the Dominion fleet. But I very strongly disagree. I don't think it's a Deus Ex Machina in the classic sense, because these wormhole aliens, the prophets, were set up for. Like, we know that they exist in the wormhole. Like, even before I watched this episode, I thought it was a possibility that the prophets are wormhole aliens, because I watched the show. Anyone who watches the show knows that this is established. It's not just these things that come out of nowhere. Like, I think the Eagles in Lord of the Rings, I know, like, people will argue that the Eagles in Lord of the Rings aren't Deus Ex Machina, but I think they are, at least much more so than them, because they're not even set up for established, at least in the movie. Well, kind of not really in the books either. It's like they exist, but you don't really get the reasoning of why they come in, or the possibility that they would come in. But with the prophets, you know the possibilities there, because they're the wormholes where they freaking live. And the Dominion fleet's going through the wormhole, and you see the Defiant go into the wormhole to try to stop them. So, that's where the prophets live. So it makes all the sense in the world that Sisko would turn to them to try to interfere. And it makes all the sense in the world, since it's been established that the prophets care about Bajor, they care about Sisko, they wouldn't want Sisko to die, that they would stop them, and of course they've been established to have power over their domain. So it makes all the sense in the world that the prophets could and would intercede. So I don't see it as Deus Ex Machina. I don't think it hurts the episode. And I think the writers purposely did that so they could set up the storyline with the prophets, which they'll continue on throughout the season. They wanted to include it, so it wasn't just there so they could save the day, because they wrote themselves into a corner. No, they could have solved this any other way. They could have had Sisko show up before Damar took down the wormhole and blew up the station and stopped it. That could have been another way they resolved it. It's not like they wrote themselves into a corner, but they chose not to, because for one thing, it ramped up the tension, which I loved, and I think it worked, and for another thing, they wanted to include the prophets into the story. In fact, this creates a long-term solution to how the Dominion can't get reinforcements, because they don't even need the minefield after this, because they have to deal with the prophets, that if the Dominion send any ships into the wormhole, they'll be gone. So the Dominion are completely cut off after this, which they actually play with in the later half of in the season 6 finale. They get back to the point that the prophets are actually become the Dominion's enemy, because they're hindering them from getting reinforcements. So it allows for a lot of storytelling possibilities, and it was set up for. It makes all the sense in the world. So I completely disagree with this. This is a Deus Ex Machina, but that's just me. So that's why I still love this episode. I think it's amazing. I think it's one of the best episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise. Anyway, let me move on to You Are Cordially Invited. This episode was okay. It was fun, but it reminds me of that Voyager episode, The Bride of Chaotica, because I thought that episode was hilarious, but it actively angers me. And then when I talked about that episode, I talked about how it was split in between from being funny, haha, to pissed off because the plot is so contrived. And I feel the same way about this episode, or a similar way, there were some great funny moments, great character moments too. I like how it starts off with explaining how life's got back to normal once the Starfleet's returned to the station, and we see Sisko and Kira going, "Oh, so good to be here again," and that was great. That was a nice touch. I love how they didn't just gloss over that, and it makes all the sense in the world that after having that intense 7-episode story arc of taking over the station, that they would want to have a sort of character-based levity episode to sort of, have a take your breath, have a breather. And I think, so that makes all the sense, and I think it really works in that regard. But what I don't like about it is the whole plot of this episode is very contrived. Like having Martok's wife wanting to stop Jadzia from marrying Worf. I mean, that was very out of nowhere. In fact, Jadzia was, and Worf was like, "Why didn't you tell me what your wife was opposed to this marriage?" It's like, "Oh, I don't know, it never came up." What? They've been talking about and building, Worf has been talking to Martok about this marriage for months and months, and they've been building it up. He didn't find it necessary to mention that his wife would have the final say on whether or not they could actually get married, and that she hated aliens and was bigoted. Didn't think to mention that. Okay, and then, and then the the whole scenes between Jadzia and what's her face, whatever, Martark's wife, were so. I mean, it was so contrived and they were purposely. It was like a stereotypical cliche. Oh, they hate each other, and then she at the Dax attacks her because that was a crescendo, and then they have to have Worf saying the wedding's off because that's the way every romantic comedy goes ever, especially if it's about a wedding. Like right before the wedding, somebody has to call off the wedding, and the friends knock some sense into them. It was so by the numbers and so cliche. And then when what's her face finally puts the wedding back on, they don't really give a reason. They just off screen they say that Jadzia goes to her and begs, but then all of a sudden she's like, "Oh, I was dumb to try to stand in the way." But at the start of the episode, she says, "A normal Klingon woman would find it difficult to get into my family. For an alien, it's going to be impossible." And then, so why'd she change her mind? Because from then, Jadzia actually didn't do anything to change her mind. She actually did things worse. But we're meant to believe because she went and begged off screen for her to change her mind, that she totally, completely changed her mind, and it was like, "Oh, I was so dumb of me to stand in the way. I can't stand." That was so contrived. Like, the plot of the episode sucked. And then you had Alexander in this episode again, but thankfully this is the last time they show Alexander, because I think they realized how bad that he wasn't working. They played on him being an idiot some more, which, oh God, I hate that. Now, but you leave that aside, there was a lot of great character moments. There was a lot of funny moments, like at Jadzia's party. I love how Jadzia's party, they were doing these animal dances. They were going, "Ah, ah, as they dance." And especially seeing Nog do that to Jadzia, and then everyone else started doing it above them. That was just funny. It was like, what the hell? And I did enjoy the Kira and Odo thing, how they were avoiding each other, and then you see them talking in the closet all night. That was a nice touch, and it's funny. The next day, seeing Morn and that other dude just get up, and it was 10 in the morning. That was pretty funny. And I you had a mention of Captain Shelby, because that dude who was doing the fire dancing, Dax, said, "Oh, I convinced Captain Shelby, 100% certain, because Ronald D. Moore is involved in this, that they're referring to Shelby from Best of Both Worlds, and that she's captain of the Sutherland now, apparently." But of course that goes against the novels, but the novels are not canon. Anyway, but I'm skating around the funniest part of the entire episode was the Klingon bachelor party, which of course, and it's a bit obtuse because they totally misled Sisko, Bashir, and O'Brien by referring to it as a bachelor party, because it's nothing like a bachelor party. It's just this ritual suffering, and it's dumb that they didn't weren't more specific, but it was absolutely hilarious. One of the best jokes in the entire show, where they're both Bashir and O'Brien are both hanging up on this thing, being over these coals, and they're supposed to see a vision, and Bashir's like, "It's working, I see a vision, I'm gonna kill Worf. I see it so clearly, I'm going to kill Worf." The best thing about it is how O'Brien responds to it. He's like, "Yeah, kill Worf." This almost sounds like a Beavis and Butthead. It's like, "Yeah, me too." It's like, kill Worf. Alright, so that was hilarious. So this episode had some really funny moments, good character moments, but come on. The plot was just so thin and contrived and cliche and by the numbers. So it switches between being funny and irritating. So all in all, I'll say this episode is down the middle. It's okay. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is Resurrection. Now, this episode gets a lot of hate. I think this is one of the lowest rated episodes on IMDb, if I remember correctly. And a lot of people say it's one of the worst of the show. I don't think it's that bad. Don't get me wrong, it's not good, but I don't think it's that bad either. It's kind of just boring, really. It's kind of just bland. It's about Barile from the Mirror Universe. Now, so we didn't get a Mirror Universe in season 5, so that was the one season they skipped over, but here we get one in season 6, but it's not a full-on Mirror Universe episode. It's just we get Barile from the Mirror Universe come over, and I actually like the character story of Kira having to confront this thief version of the man she used to love. And I love how she went to Cisco and he was like telling her about how he had to deal with how he felt when he had to deal with seeing Jennifer from the Mirror Universe. But that being said, I mean, there were some good, interesting character moments, which is why I don't think this episode totally sucked. But it was kind of boring. They didn't really go anywhere with it, and having like the intendant come on, pretend to be Kira, it was kind of silly, and I don't know. It's just the episode didn't really justify its existence. So, whatever. It's fine. Let's move on. So, next episode is Statistical Improbability, and this deals with Bashir because he's genetically enhanced. He gets a group of other genetically enhanced people who something went wrong, so they're a bit mentally unstable, and so they live in an institute. So he looks after them for an episode and tries to help them. And I did a full-length review of this episode, and I think it's fine. I think some people really like this episode. I don't hate it, but I don't like the fact that Bashir is genetically enhanced. I got into this in season 5. I thought that was a downfall of season 5, and season 6 is having to live with it because it's already been established. Unfortunately, they can't retcon it and pretend it never happened. Kind of wish they did, though. They could have brought up, actually, when they said that, we were just kidding. He's not really, because that's so dumb. It's totally, it retcons his character and goes against his character. I mean, Bashir is an interesting enough character. You don't have to throw in this sci-fi element that's just out of nowhere in order to make him interesting, but whatever. Anyway, so they have to deal with it, and so they play into it more by having... and as I got to when I did my full-length review of this episode, it's pretty much just a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest ripoff. I mean, it's your typical, stereotypical, cliche, like mental institution type episode. Like, the character of Jack is very cliche and typical of the rampant, like, insane or a person with mental problems kind of episode. And you had the cliche, you had the guy saying, "I'm Patrick," and you had the girl who won't talk, and the other girl was just hitting on everyone. It's the cliches. And I don't know, like, never really, like, the fact that they're saying, because they're genetically enhanced, that's why they have these issues, because they had problems setting it up. I don't think they've really justified that. Now, what I think saves this episode is the storyline about them, doing work for projections for Starfleet against the war with the Dominion, and the conclusion they come to is that they're going to lose no matter what, and so they decide to try to give all this information to the Dominion so the Dominion can win, and Bashir urges Starfleet to surrender, and Cisco and everyone's like, "No, I don't care," or whatever, and the conclusion Bashir finally comes to at the end is, look, there's always a variable a variable that you don't account for. Like, you didn't even account for that one chick who never talks having a thing for you, and that she would stop you. So if you can't even account for what's in this room, how can you account for everything that's happening in the entire galaxy? So that was a cool story. Like, I enjoyed that. I liked that. But it is kind of inconsistent with what happened later on, because nothing. And if you've seen up to the end of the show, which I hope you have, you know that nothing really that they didn't account for in this episode itself happened. Like, they predicted that the Romulans would join the Alliance, which they did, and they didn't even predict that the Breen would join the Alliance, which is actually a point to the Dominion's favor. And they predicted that there would be an uprising on Cardassia. And yet Starfleet still managed to win the war. So I don't really get, like, why their projections were wrong. They didn't really prove, nothing really, a variable didn't really happen. Although you could argue that the Romulans joined the war a lot earlier than what they predicted, because they predicted the Romulans would join like a year later once their supply ran out or something, but it actually happened a lot sooner than that because Cisco and Garrett got together. So maybe that was the variable that they didn't account for, but still, I don't know if it's enough. I think it's kind of inconsistent. Anyway, let's get to the next episode, which is the Magnificent Ferengi. And I think this is, bar none, this is the best Ferengi episode. Like, this is where they really... It's funny that the season has the best and the worst Ferengi episode in the same season. I'll get to the worst later. But this episode, and I did a top 10 like funniest episodes of the Star Trek franchise, and this was my number one, and I 100% stand by that ruling. This is the funniest episode in the Star Trek franchise. Like, this is just joke after joke. It reminds me of like a Naked Gun or Airplane or something like that, because it's just joke after joke after joke after joke that hits. They all hit. Most of the Ferengi episodes are just like, they're just really bad and boring and not all that funny. But this, like, it seems like the writers like really gelled. Again, this is, I'm saying, like, in season 6, the writers really got their shit together, and they really congealed and knew how to speak for these characters, and all the actors as well. Like the ensemble of this, like, just the comedic timing was absolutely amazing. I mean, it starts off with Quark and Rom having the conversation where Quark's like, "Oh, I've been looking for you all day," and Rom's like, "Okay, now you go hide and I'll find you." I mean, it's hilarious. And then they try to get Nog to join up, and Rom's like, "But you know how to fire a phaser." Like, it's hilarious. And then you get the Lek, which is a really interesting concept, because I love how they didn't just do it stereotypical Ferengi. He was like a hitman and assassin Ferengi, and it was just such an interesting dynamic. Draw all the different characters. You got Gala again, who was introduced in season 5, and just the, like, oh my god. Okay, so when I was watching this episode and that scene came on where they're in the Hollow Suites training to take on the Jem'Hadar, as soon as the scene started, before anything even happened, I started laughing hilariously, just from memory, just because I knew how hilarious this scene is. I mean, that scene where Ron just slams into the wall and runs, like, throws up his weapons, like, "I surrender," and then Lek just kills Moogie. Like, oh my god, that scene was so good. And I'm not even getting into the part where, like, Nog is talking to the others, trying to plan out the plan. He's like, "You should call me sir." And, you know, Lek and Nog get upset with each other because he's not calling him sir. And Quark's like, "Hey, we're all a team here." And Rom's like, "We're all a team, sir." It's, again, like, the comedic, like, timing and everything. And then, of course, the end, we got Iggy Pop playing Vorta. I mean, that's pretty amazing, and he does such a good job too of playing this, like, slimy Vorta. And then you have the whole thing where they have that the dude who gets shot because the Ferengi, because Quark didn't tell them about there was 50 bars. Like, the whole thing from start to finish just works. It's just such a good episode. I mean, the one thing, a criticism I have, and this has more to do with Deep Space Nine portrayal of the Ferengi overall, is in this episode, like, they portrayed Quark's talking about getting Ferengi to go on the mission, but, like, Ferengi aren't mercenaries. They're not very good at fighting, which totally disregards everything Next Generation, because the Ferengi were shown to have a very active, like, military. Like, they had these Marauder class ships that could take on the Enterprise. You had a group of Ferengi renegades who took over the Enterprise. And the Ferengi actually, like, pretty much destroyed Picard's previous ship, the Stargazer. So they're portrayed to be pretty gruesome fighters, and yet in this episode, all of a sudden, the Ferengis are just a bunch of sissies that rely on Nausicaans and Klingons to do all their fighting for them. So that, as I said, that has more to do with Deep Space Nine kind of rewriting the Ferengis in that way to make them less sort of militaristic. But so I'm willing to let that go because this episode is so good. You know, I found out recently, and I didn't realize this, that It was originally supposed to be Grand Nagus Zek who gets captured, who they had to come rescue, and not Ishka. But they couldn't get Wallace Shawn for that time period, and it's such a shame they got him later for the other episode. Oh, I'll get to that. But so they did Ishka instead. But I actually think it makes more sense with Ishka. I mean, you could kind of say it would make more sense with Zek why the other Ferengi would join up and why they would be so willing to rescue, because it's their Grand Nagus. But having it be Ishka gives it an element, a personal element, with, Rom and Quark and Nagda as someone they're related to and trying to rescue their own mother. And it still makes sense for the other Ferengi because she's, with Zek, and Zek thinks very highly of her, and Zek is the one who ordered the rescue in the first place. So it still works for that. So overall, I think it actually works better having it be Ishka. But anyway, I love this episode. I think this is a great episode. It's the funniest episode, the best comedy episode in all of Star Trek. So I think this episode is amazing. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Waltz. Now, this title's kind of similar to Duet. You know how much I love that episode, so it seems like they're trying to sort of recapture that. It's about, Sisko and Dukat being, I hate the trapped on the planet cliche, well, whatever, but it's basically just a conversation, kind of like Duet. It was just an interrogation conversation, so it wasn't nothing extravagant, and this is supposed to be the same thing with Dukat and Sisko. And don't get me wrong, I like this episode, but I don't see it as that grand. I don't love this episode like some people do. Because, I don't know, I find it kind of slow-paced, kind of boring, particularly, when they flip back to the rescue storyline of, Worf and all them looking. And then we got, Kira is giving orders to Worf and giving, orders from Starfleet when she's just a Bajoran officer or what. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, so... So, yeah, that kind of storyline was kind of boring. Although I did like when, Kira had this message and it was kind of garbled, and Bashir does the old cliche. It's like, oh, I couldn't hear anything. That was too garbled. And Worf's like, and Jadzia's like, nah, you heard her fine. And Worf's like, yeah, you heard her. We'll do her orders. And Bashir's like, well, blah, blah. He gets pissed off, and Worf's like, you may leave the bridge. That was great. I love how Worf actually called Bashir out on this bullshit cliche. Oh, I couldn't hear her. It was too garbled. And be like, nah, you fucking heard it. But yeah, and the ticking clock thing was kind of contrived too. How they always had to fake out when they were beaming up people. They made you think it was Sisko and Dukat, but it was just two random people. It was never them. That was kind of annoying. But the Sisko and Dukat stuff was more interesting. I did enjoy that. And I did love how Dukat was going insane, and he was seeing voices and talking to people. I don't know, some people hated what they did to Dukat after Sacrifice of Angels. I don't necessarily do. I mean, I think it definitely was a downstep in his character, but I think his character was the best during that station takeover arc, so you couldn't get any better than that. I still prefer this crazy Dukat to the nice Dukat of season 4, which I thought was bullshit. Anyway, so I like the interactions between Sisko and Dukat. It was fascinating enough, but I don't know, it wasn't that great. It was still kind of dull at times and kind of predictable. It was a bit weird how he was went off to kill all the Bajorans, but they never really followed up on that. So this episode was good. It was good. I'll just leave it at that. Anyway, next episode we get is Who Mourns for Morn. This episode was surprisingly good. Actually, I don't know. I really like this episode where a lot of people think it's just a throwaway, silly episode. Silly Quark episode. But I think I love the fact how they are focusing an episode on Morn. And again, I was just thinking about the Cynics Corner, that's a website I used to use, because when they were going through all the episodes of the season, they had a little paragraph about what he thought of each episode. When he got to Who Mourns for Morn, all he said was, who cares? But I disagree. I care. I think it is. I love how they play. It's like here it's a running gag that was going on throughout the entire 6 seasons of the show, and it was sort of building and building, and here's where it really crescendos and pays off, because it's the gag that Morn will talk your ear off, but you never actually hear him talk in the show, and the reason for that is because the guy who plays him is an extra, so they don't want to pay him for a speaking role, and if he speaks they have to pay him more. But they turned that into like a running gag, and in this episode, like they create a whole like backstory for him. They have a funeral, a whole mythology, and the episode is pretty much all about him. But again, he's hardly in it, so they can still not pay him and keep him as an extra because it's about, because he's supposedly dead in most of the episode, and it's about like all the people who used to work with him, and I think these are pretty interesting characters. I love how they slowly trickle in. They all have to try to fool Quark and tell him different stories, and that ending where they finally get the what is it, like a ridiculous amount of bricks of gold pressed and platinum, and it shows up and Quark's is like looking at him and playing with it, but around him everyone's pulling guns on each other like a Reservoir Dogs situation. He doesn't even realize this until he stands up again. And he's like, oh shit. So it's good. It was it's not great, it's nothing breakthrough, but I think it was an enjoyable, good episode. Anyway, we'll get into the next episode, which is Far Beyond the Stars, which, I don't know, this is actually an episode, watching it again, I don't think is as good as I have before, because I think I put this in my top 10 before. I'm not sure if I would again. Don't get me wrong, I still like this episode. I still think it's a great episode, but examining it more carefully, I'm starting to see that it's more style than substance, if you know what I'm saying, because the whole theme is about, like, what it has to say about racism is amazing. Like, the character story that Benny goes through, trying to get his stuff published and being rejected, like, that is a good story that's told well, and it's so great seeing like all the actors out of their makeup playing different roles. And I love how they do, it's a vision from the prophet, so they do the mind-bendiness of, like, the baseball player played by Michael Dorn comes up to Benny, and all of a sudden it's Worf, and he's like, did you see the game? Like, that was, like, stuff like that was really great, and how Benny couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what was not, and so it's kind of trying to play on that theme of even Sisko at the end, not knowing who was real and who wasn't, and who was a dream and who was a dreamer. So that was really cool, and I love how they speak to the power of imagination and of storytelling. So that was great. So don't get me wrong, I do really love this episode. I just don't think it's necessarily one of the best of the show, because they didn't really tie in why this vision was happening. It was a vision from the prophets because Sisko was having doubts and wanting to quit Starfleet, but I don't know, like, the whole thing about him wanting to quit Starfleet, that felt a bit contrived in the first place. Secondly, why this prophecy or this vision changed his mind wasn't very clear. I don't think they made a strong connection between the issue, the problems of racism in the 60s and what Benny had to go through and his imagining of wanting to tell the story of the Deep Space Nine. How did that make Sisko change it? I know they had that scene at the end where Sisko's looking out in space and thinking of Benny and saying how he's going to soldier on, but I don't think that really explained it. It didn't really tie it up. It didn't. So I think the overall. So that's what I mean. It's a lot of good ideas. It's a gimmick, basically, of having the actors being out of makeup and playing people in the 60s. But it doesn't all tie together in a way that actually works for the overall story of Deep Space Nine. That's why I think watching this episode in context really made a difference for me. Where if I just watch it out of context of the episodes on, it's kind of a bit more forgivable. But when you put it in context of Deep Space Nine, it doesn't really fit why the prophecy given them visions, or why did it change his mind. What does it really have to do with anything? So that's just my one little drawback on. But don't get me wrong, as I said, I still love this episode, and I still think it's a great episode. I think Avery Brooks did a great job acting and directing in this episode. This is the point where I think his overacting actually works for the episode. As I say, he does crazy very well. I mean, he portrays someone Benny was like slowly losing his mind. So I think he did a great job in this episode. So, and of course, like the whole like 60s thing, like you can tell a lot of care was put into this episode. So let's get to the next episode, which is One Little Ship. Now, I recently rewatched my top 10 Deep Space Nine episodes, and this episode was in my bottom 5 worst episodes. I'm not sure I'd still put it in the bottom 5 worst episodes of the entire show, but it's not a good episode. I mean, I like the concept. This is one of the episodes I hadn't seen until like years after it aired. And when I heard, oh, there's this episode I missed that's about like the runabout turning small and Defiant getting taken over by Jim Hadar and those tiny runabout having to, fight their way to free the Defiant. I was like, that sounds awesome. That sounds like a cool, fun idea. But then when I actually saw the actual episode, it really did not work. It was really boring. Like the shrinking runabout it was kind of incidental. Like it didn't really amount to anything. It wasn't really crucial to the story. It didn't really have anything to do with anything. Basically, the whole point of it was so Bashir and Jadzia can make a bunch of small jokes. That's about it. A bunch of jokes about them being small, and I mean it was so cheesy too, especially at the end where Odo's like, "Oh, you two are 2 centimeters smaller now." Ho, ho, ho. I mean that was it was not very funny. But the worst thing about this episode by far, it was the whole Jim Hadar. You had like the alphas and the gammas. So you had Jim Hadar that were bred in the alpha quadrant, and they're called the alphas, and they were supposed to be better, and they're like, we're better than you, and they were like naive and didn't really know what they were doing. That was so stupid. I'm sorry. That storyline actively angers me. It was just like I think that's why I put this in the bottom 5, because it was just so cheesy, and they were acting like it was such a stereotypical minions fighting amongst themselves, and then Sisko and crew gets the better of them, and they were like, "Oh, you should have listened to the smart guy and killed us while you had the chance." Blee blee blee. But they're smarter and better, but they're really being arrogant. It was just and the tiny runabout didn't really have anything to do with anything. This episode was actually very bad. I'm sorry. It was. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is Honor Amongst Thieves. This was a really out of nowhere episode. I say that not in a good way. I don't hate this episode. This episode is okay, but it's really has nothing to do with anything. It almost feels like a callback to Season 5, which, as you know, I don't think is as good as Season 6. Because it deals with the Orion Syndicate, which was established a lot more in Season 5. I think it might have been brought up. No, it wasn't brought up in Season 4. But anyway, like, when you hear talk of the Orion Syndicate in, like, Discovery, I don't know if they mentioned Discovery, but in, like, the original series or Enterprise in particular. I think they might have mentioned it a bit in the reboots. I'm not sure, but anyway, whenever they bring up the Orion Syndicate, especially in Enterprise, it's Orions. It's like what they call. It's like the Cardassian Union or the Klingon Empire. They call it the Orion Syndicate. Where here, the Orion Syndicate is like the Mafia. And you don't see any Orions in the Orion Syndicate. It's all a bunch of random aliens. So I got a theory on this. I don't think this has been confirmed by non-canon material, but my theory is that the Orion Syndicate used to be what the name for the Orion official government or whatever, like the Cardassian Union or Klingon Empire was the Orion Syndicate. That's what it was in Enterprise times, but the Orion Syndicate was so geared towards piracy and illegal activity that over the centuries, has it integrated into the larger interstellar universe, it became more of a illegal organization that it did an official government, and so eventually over the centuries it just became that a mafia type organization that integrated all sorts of aliens and other species that wanted to be involved. They just had the gold standard because the Orions as a species had set up the whole thing, and so it became more of an intergalactic mafia type organization than an official Orion government thing. That's just my theory. And I think they had some non-canon novels that said that the Orions were actually in charge of the Orion Syndicate, like they were the head guys and the other aliens were just in the lower tiers. But the Ramus guy, he wasn't Orion. He seemed to be pretty high tier. But regardless, I'm getting off on a tangent. And this episode was just a ripoff of Donnie Brasco. Plain and simple. If you haven't seen Donnie Brasco, I think came out a couple years before this episode did. It was Al Pacino and Johnny Depp, and Johnny Depp played an undercover FBI agent who settled up to this mafia, and to infiltrate the mafia, so he settles up and he makes friends with this guy who's like a low-level nobody. So he's not really doing it to get to him, he's doing it to get to the people above him, but in the process he ends up betraying him, ends up putting him in a situation where he's going to get killed, but he has to go through with it because he has no choice, and then Johnny Depp has to let him die. I just described this episode. The exact same thing that happened with O'Brien and Nick Tate, who was also in the Next Generation episode Final Mission. I think he's a pretty well-known Australian actor. But anyway, so he plays the low-level Orion Syndicate guy, and O'Brien messes up to him to get it to people higher, and then they have this whole thing about the Dominion. But it's basically Donnie Brasco. Now, why they felt the need to do a Donnie Brasco episode in the middle of season 6, it's beyond me. I know they try to tie it into Dominion War by having a Vorder show up, but it doesn't really. It's really an aside. And I know they try to excuse why they get O'Brien because they needed someone outside of Starfleet Intelligence with engineering background. How convenient. But I don't really buy any of that. I don't buy that they would get O'Brien to go on this undercover mission. And I don't know. It just seems really out of nowhere. I mean, but for what they did do what they did well. I mean, did find it emotionally impactful when O'Brien had to sentence Nick Tate to death, and he was like, "Look after my cat." I mean, that was a bit emotional, but I don't know. It's kind of out of nowhere. So this episode is okay. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is Change of Heart. I love this episode. I think I did a full-length review on this episode not too long ago. I think this is a very underrated episode. I think this is probably the best romance episode. I think I had life signs when I did my top 10 romance episodes. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to change it to this one. Or at least have this one higher. I think this was my number 6 or something, or 4. But this is such a good romantic episode. This is like the crescendo. Again, this is them really falling into the whole Orphan Dax thing. Like season 5, they kind of fucked this romance up a little bit when they got into the lad who he was out without sin bullcrap. But they really bounced back again in season 6 with, the marriage episode was all well and good. But this really cemented their love for each other. And they did in the best, the episode the whole way is established. It has Worf and Dax, showing a normal day in their lives and their banter, and they're talking about going on their honeymoon, but then it leads into, a serious mission where they have to go retrieve this Cardassian spy who's spying for the Federation, and they have to go on this dangerous mission, but Jadzia gets shot, and Worf has to make the decision to leave her to die or to save the Cardassian. Now, I read some reviews that said this. I couldn't believe how many reviews I read that said this episode sucked. And they said that it had huge plot holes because Worf could have saved the Cardassian and then saved Jadzia and done both. Which these people were not paying attention to the fucking episode. Because the episode made it clear it was like a day or at least 10-hour journey to retrieve the Cardassian. And so if Worf went to retrieve the Cardassian, by the time he got back, Jadzia would have been dead. That's the whole point. You missed that point. He couldn't have saved them both. That's the whole fucking point. Now, it's possible that Jadzia could have still been alive by the time we got back, but that was a risk. That was a gamble. I think it was more likely Jadzia would have died by the time he gotten back with the Cardassian, and so he decided not to take that risk. He decided to let the Cardassian die rather than to let his wife die. And by letting the Cardassian die, he was condemning perhaps millions of people to die because this Cardassian had crucial information for the war effort. So that was an amazing moral quandary, and I love the way, like, the interactions between Worf and Nex when she's saying, "I'm a Starfleet officer, I understand, leave me here," and you like the beating of Worf's heart when you see him. Like, I was like, I think I was bawling, and I know I can get really emotional, but that was such a powerful scene. So I would say this is one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, if not for this side plot. They had this really awful side plot with Bashir and Quark, and Bashir and O'Brien wouldn't defeat Quark and Tonga, so he gets Bashir to do it, and Bashir gets distracted about how much they both love Jadzia, which I don't think it really lines up to the earlier seasons of how Bashir actually felt about Jadzia, and it was just cheesy and stupid, and I really hated it. So, I mean, I wish they just would have done without that and focused more on the Jadzia and Worf stuff, because that works so much better. And that ending where she's lying in the infirmary and Worf is like, you could say I love you. Like, such a powerful. This is one of the best romance episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night. This is another episode I don't like. I think after rewatching it, I maybe don't like it. I'm not as harsh as I've been on it in the past, because it's kind of okay. It does have some redeeming qualities. It is somewhat interesting to watch. It's always interesting getting a glimpse of the Cardassian occupation of Bajor in the past. But it's really dumb. I'm sorry. Dukat had an affair with Kira's mother. I mean, do we really need to retcon that in? I mean, I think that's so dumb, because it completely changes the relationship between Dukat and Kira and makes it so that Dukat knew all about Kira all along because he banged her mother. This is just dumb. And then this is one of the worst uses of time travel ever, where Kira goes back in time to find out if her mother was banging Dukat, and when she's dead she wants to kill her mother and thus affect the timeline and kill her own mother because of this. It's I don't know. I like the whole thing with Kira having to be like a comfort woman, and they're not very clear on whether or not this is actually reality or if this is a vision. I mean, but in the Trials and Tribulations, they use the Orb of Time to actually travel back and meet Kirk, so you think this is actually reality. But the whole Orb of Time was such a bad idea. That was just a throwaway way so they could find an excuse to do time travel in that episode, and so they should have never brought it back. And it's funny because as much as I love Season 6, whenever Season 6 does time travel, and there will be a couple times I'll mention later, it doesn't do it well. Time travel Season 6 does not use time travel very well, I'm sorry to say. Whenever they use time travel, it doesn't work out very well. But anyway, so yeah, this episode, not good, but not one of the worst, but not good. Anyway, next episode is Inquisition. Now, I did a full-length review for this episode. This is another episode I think people love. I don't hate it, but it's kind of just okay. I talk about how it's really, the concept of Section 31 is really good, and having, I'm blanking on his name, William Sadler, I think, the dumbass from Shawshank Redemption. Anyway, and he was the villain in Die Hard 2, I think, too. But anyway, having him play Sloane and being a Section 31 agent, that's great. That's a great idea. But the episode's all about this whole thing of Sloane being with internal affairs and having this Inquisition about Bashir, them thinking he was a spy. which is dumb. You know Bashir's not a spy. I mean, what kind of naive moron actually for a single solitary second thought they would reveal Bashir as a spy? He's not a spy. I mean, that's so dumb. And so it just becomes a cliche trial or witch hunt type episode that they don't really do anything with. I mean, they don't even reveal Section 31 till the very end, the very last scene, and is all done through dialogue, which, again, Discovery is completely inconsistent with. I'm sick of people trying to defend Discovery and saying, oh, they could make up for it later. No, they couldn't make up for it later because Section 31 is established in this episode to be autonomous from its very creation, which was 100 years before Discovery takes place. But anyway, getting off topic, talk about this, and they can't make an excuse for it. Anyway, off topic. But so yeah, the Section 31 thing was interesting, but that's not what the episode deals with. The episode deals with the stupid Inquisition, which was just a cliche storyline about them thing, and all of a sudden, like, Sisko and the others act like, oh, how dare you? I mean, it's so obvious that it was just a holodeck. I don't know, like. Yeah, this is an interesting concept. They had good ideas in this episode. They didn't do anything good with it. I think there's much better ways they could have did this episode. Throw away that whole Inquisition storyline about Bashir being a spy, first of all. That just doesn't work. But focus more on it being about Sloane and Bashir in Section 31. Then it would have been more interesting. But so the way they did it is just kind of, it didn't totally suck. It was. I would still say it's good, but just barely good. Anyway, next episode is In the Pale Moonlight. All right. So watching this episode again, I wanted to make sure, not like watch it to like analyze it. I want to make sure. I'm not just taking it for granted that this episode is amazing and is awesome. I want to see, does it really live up to the high standards I'd set for it? And the answer is yes. Yes, it does. Most certainly. I'm not colored by nostalgia, by memory. This is an amazing episode. And it's very similar to Duet in the sense that it's a bottle show. It uses very little special effects. It's mostly dialogue, mostly people talking, yet super intense. Like, this is probably one of the most intense war story of the Dominion War, and it doesn't feature. It's not like Sacrifice of Angels. It has these, epic battles, space battles, and ships fighting each other. It's just Sisko and Garrick sitting in the room talking, and it's just as engaging and it's just as suspenseful. And I love when stuff can pull that off, but. Oh my God, like, Andrew Robinson's so great. I think this is probably his best performance in the entire show as Garrick. And I love how, because some early episodes, particularly like early in season 6, they were playing Garrick too much as like, oh, a friend, I'm an ally, I'm going to help out Dominion. But this reminds you of the type of person that Garrick actually is. That his interests are aligned with the Starfleet and the Federation, so he does want to help them defeat the Dominion. But that doesn't mean he's a nice guy. He's willing to use all these dirty tactics, and he uses Sisko to do it. And having like the Romulans, because I think when in season 5 Call of Arms, when they established the Romulans had a non-aggression pact with the Dominion, I think that was the writers' way of pushing the Romulans aside, because they didn't want them to be a main opponent, because Romulans were never an important species of Deep Space Nine. So let's just say they have a non-aggression pact, so that will explain why they're not going to be involved in the war, so we don't have to deal with them. And I love how they were willing to overrule that. They were willing to push that aside and use that plot point as a way to tell an amazing story. To take advantage of that, which I think was just an excuse to put the Romulans off the show, but make it part of the story. Make it so they were an important element that the Federation needed in order to win the war with the Dominion. We made it so Sisko was determined to bring them into the war, and that they can go to Garrick, and who would be willing to use all these dirty tactics in order to get them to gain the war. Because I love how Garrick explains it at the end, that they think the Dominion, they would believe that the Dominion was lying and trying to deceive them, because that's exactly what they would do. Which is great. There was so much gray areas and the whole thing of Tolar, the guy who was like lying, and he had to Sisko. That scene with Sisko having to bribe Quark was amazing, where Quark was just like, "Oh, Sisko, you want to bribe me?" He was so proud of him, and that was, it's just, this episode was just so well structured, so great from start to finish. And the concept of having, even when I saw the preview for this episode, and the concept was about them trying to bring the Romulans into the war, that alone was enough to get me invested. Like, wow, this looks awesome. But when I actually watched it, it was even better than I thought. Now, again, I hear, although I never heard anyone specifically say this, but I just heard like secondhand other people saying that they didn't like this episode because it goes against Roddenberry's vision. It's controversial because it shows Sisko, our hero, the Starfleet captain, doing very shady things and participating in murder, participating in bribery, participating in deceiving the entire alien race in order to save the Federation. But I love that. It's a lot more nuanced, and shows that the things aren't always black and white and simple, and that it's such a great character story for Sisko as well. Now, let me get back to Cynic's Corner, because I never forget what Cynic's Corner said about this episode. It said that this episode was amazing despite Avery Brooks' attempts to torpedo it with his acting. And I have to agree. I'm sorry, I know some people disagree. I had someone said, "You're dead to me, Mark," that you didn't like the scenes with. But the scenes where Sisko was, doing his captain's log and doing the narration, I never really liked that. I think first of all, narration is always tricky to do, and I think it did come off as a bit hokey, and Avery Brooks' overacting did not help. People are dying every day, worlds struggling for their freedom, and here I am arguing with the finer points of morality. No, I have to get my eye back on winning the war. I'm sorry, people are dying. No, that is bad acting. I don't care if you disagree, you're objectively wrong. That is not good. But stay with me now. Not all of it was bad acting. There were a few parts of the logs which I do think were good acting. Some of it did really work, such as the whole build-up to the "It's a Fake" scene, which I'll get to in a second. That is great acting, by the way, not bad acting. I can't believe so many people get that reversed. But anyway, there's the scene building up to the "It's a Fake" scene where Sisko's doing his log and he's talking about how the souffle will either rise or it won't. Like, that's so, that is so good. That, again, this is the expert writing that comes into play, where because if you didn't have that narration, you wouldn't have, if they just cut from "here's the rod" and then all of a sudden cut to him saying "it's a fake," you lose a lot. You need that moment in between to get inside Sisko's head, to feel like how he really hammers home how the fate of the entire Alpha Quadrant, the fate of quadrillions of people all depend on this one moment. And that really helps strike the impact. So when Senator V-Neck comes back and says, "it's a fake," that to me is Ned Stark losing his head moment. Or even better. To me, that was the most shocking, especially because it's Star Trek, and this is the 90s when I was watching. I didn't, Star Trek normally, it would have, set up a situation like this, and the rod would pass, and everything would be okay, and the heroes would win. It was inconceivable to me that rod would not pass spec, that Senator V-Neck would come back and say, "it's a fake." I remember being chilled to my bone, totally in utter shock when that moment happened. And that's why I think this is one of the most powerful moments in all of television. I don't understand why people make fun of this and say it's bad acting. It is not bad acting. The guy who played Vreenek actually did a good job. I think this it may seem a bit over the top to go, it's a fake, but it fits into the type of person he has, because he would be outraged by the fact that Sisko was trying to deceive him like that. I thought that was amazing acting. I thought that was an amazing moment. I thought that was one of the best moments in all of television history. And that's why I think it's quoted a lot. That's why a lot of people going around going, it's a fake. Because it's such a powerful, noteworthy moment that I absolutely, totally loved. But as I said, with the Sisko Captain's Log, I do think, like, even though a couple times he was a bit over the top, I do think it did ultimately work. I kind of come around to it, particularly with this rewatch of the episode, that it actually does help, because it does fill in, get you inside his mindset. And I love how they mislead you, because they make you think that everything went wrong, which comes in handy in it's a fake moment, because you think everything's going to shit, because Sisko from the beginning talks about how everything went wrong and everything's bad, but it turned out the Romulans did join the war, but he's talking about it going wrong because he did a lot of bad things that destroyed his self-respect, as Garrick says. By the way, that scene when Sisko punched Garrick, oh my god, so amazing. But anyway, the point is, with the narration, I've come around, and I've finally told myself that I'm to live with it, because I can live with it. I can live with it. Computer, erase that entire log. Okay, and then we get into his way, and this is so hard to go from that amazing episode in the Pale Moonlight to the introduction of Vic Fontaine. Now, I did a full-length review on this episode, which I'd actually recommend checking out, because I went back and watched it recently. I forgot I did this thing where, the scene where Odo thinks Kira's a hologram, and he's saying, well done, Vic. Like, I did this thing where I did that scene, but I put in, like, sitcom laugh tracks. It was like, ha 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 ha, ooh. Like, it so fits. And that's my problem with this episode. It does come off like a sitcom, especially that scene in particular. It was so cheesy how Vic, deceived Odo into thinking that Kira's a hologram, and it wasn't. It was actually the real Kira, and he was acting like an idiot and insisting he was a hologram. It was so sitcomish. But as I said in my full review, I have mixed feelings about this episode, because it introduced Vic Fontaine, who I can't fucking stand, and it puts Kira and Odo together, which I'm very happy about. I know a lot of people disagree with me. It seems like I'm completely alone in this, but I actually like the Kira and Odo relationship. The one thing I will say, and that kiss at the end, you could tell the actors were very uncomfortable. That was not a very convincing kiss. I will grant you that. But I think the chemistry between Kira and Odo otherwise really worked, because these are two characters who always gelled from the very beginning, from the very first episode. They always, really, more than any two characters, even more than Worf and Dax, I think, really connected. And they overplayed the storyline with Odo having a crush on Kira, which was getting old, so I think they actually needed to get rid of that and take it to a full relationship in order to move things forward. Otherwise, it would just get it already become tiresome, to be honest. And I totally bought. I think the way they made Kira change her mind and actually love Odo, even in earlier seasons, they established that she definitely didn't have a thing for her. I think they totally sold that she came around to see him in a different light. And like that moment of clarity thing she said at the end of the episode, I think that totally made sense. I think the way that they slowly, and the way Odo was behaving differently because he thought he was a hologram, he saw a different side of him and starting to see things in a different way. So I totally bought their relationship, and I loved seeing them together. I think The relationship will be kind of off and on throughout the rest of the series. Sometimes it really works, sometimes it doesn't, seem a bit forced. But overall, I think this is one of my favorite. I might do a video one of these days where I count on my favorite romances in Star Trek, and I think this is one of them. This one would be up there. I know everyone and their mother disagrees with me. I don't care. I still love it. So that's why I think this episode's okay. Otherwise, it sucks. Because Vic Fontaine, I cannot stand Vic Fontaine. Now, one time when I mentioned like season 6 was my favorite season, Don Woolley, who I did talks with before, was like, oh, season 6, even though that has Vic Fontaine in it. But the thing is that Vic Fontaine isn't in season 6 very much. He's in, because this is like episode 20. He's not even introduced until episode 20, so it's the very end. And he doesn't appear that much in the rest of season 6. Season 7 is what is really damaged by Vic Fontaine, which I'll get into when I cover season 7, which would be a much better season if it wasn't for this fucking scene hologram. But I know so many people like agree with me, but a lot of people disagree with me and like, I love Vic, how can you hate Vic? First of all, he's a guy in the ripoff, plain and simple, and it's like all this, and they build up like what's his face, Moriarty, the hologram in Next Generation, and the Doctor and Voyager, and they had to establish that it was such a weird thing for them to be sentient and aware, and like they really, especially with the Doctor and Voyager, they really took their time to establish him. And then here Vic Fontaine pops up out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, I'm a hologram and I'm smart and I know everything, and I know I'm a hologram, it's all good, that I'm sentient, nobody cares. That annoys me. That pisses me off. And the way he behaves, again, a guy in the ripoff, and he fucking sings all the fucking time. I don't watch Deep Space Nine so I can hear like Frank Sinatra rip-offs. What the fuck? Because I go for 5 minutes straight. It's anyway. So this episode is good and bad, so it's okay. Next episode is The Reckoning, which I reckon is actually a pretty good episode. Anyway, I actually, this is kind of similar to, it's like the sequel to The Rapture from season 5, and I actually like this episode better. Again, the season 6 I think does everything better than season 5, just in general, like the character writing, the acting, the music, and everything just gels so much better. And this episode is particularly interesting. I mean, they follow up on what happened with the Rapture, where they're still, digging that archaeology, the lost city that Sisko found in that episode, and they find like an artifact, and Sisko brings it on board. Which I love the interactions between Sisko and Dax in this episode, where he takes the artifact and he smashes it, and then later on is like, I just had a feeling to do it, and then he's holding the pieces, and Jadzia's like, Benjamin, you're not getting another urge, are you? It's just a great character interaction. I love Kai Wynn in this episode. I think it's done really well, how she's being really pissy with Benjamin. I think it fits better than how she was portrayed in The Rapture. As I said, I wasn't really happy with how she was portrayed in The Rapture, but here I think it works a bit better because she's being very petty and self-serving, which is how she should be portrayed. And I love it. Yeah, how she's like, oh, you destroyed the artifact, and she won't actually listen to Sisko when he tries to say, look, this is what the prophets want. I think that fits her character a hell of a lot more. Now, the epic battle, the reckoning between the Pal race and the prophets, maybe a bit over the top fantasy. Maybe a bit too much trying to be like a fantasy epic, a cliche fantasy epic, by the way, where they have the good and evil demon and they come with beams of light that just meet in the middle and they go, and the light goes there. I mean, come on. That is a bit cliche. But I still like this episode. I love the moral quandary that Sisko was put in. That's Jake was the one who the Pal race took over, and he was willing to sacrifice his son, even though his acting is a bit over the top. We have to let it play out, but it was still, I like it. It was still an interesting aspect. So I'd say this is a pretty good episode. Anyway, Next episode is Valiant, which is not a good episode. I did do a full-length review of this several years ago. I think I gave it like a 5 or 6, and I'm giving it a 3 now. So I don't think as highly as I did when I watched it. This episode is just annoying. I don't like it. And this is, again, an issue with them trying to give Jake something to do. And so they put Jake and Nog on a ship of cadets. And I talked about this in my review, how it makes no sense for them to be on a Defiant class ship because they're cadets. They wouldn't be on a warship that's built for war, not luxury. They would be on a different kind of ship, especially because their mission was to chart the borders of the Federation or whatever. They wouldn't do that on a warship or short range warship. So that's total bullshit. That was just because the show just had the sets for that, and they wanted to use the sets and the models. I think they should have used an Intrepid class ship, so they could have used Voyager set and models. They do that actually later in season 7, but it would have made a lot more sense. But anyway, leaving all that aside, this episode was very annoying. I don't know if I really buy the behavior of these kids and how they're all arrogant. And I mean, the whole point is it's hammering you on the head, definitely, that these are inexperienced kids and they shouldn't be put in charge, and because of that they fuck up and they make a mistake. That was evident from the start, and that's how the end happened. So you saw the end coming. It was the most predictable thing in the world, especially it was like, oh, we can take it on, we can do anything, we're a Red Squad. I didn't buy that they would be that stupid. I just don't agree with the betrayal. I think they were trying too hard to be like, oh, these are inexperienced morons, don't know what they're doing. Even though they're the best of the cadets, they're still cadets, so they shouldn't be put in charge. Duh. Why do we need an episode about that? What does that help? And I thought they were going to go somewhere with the relationship between the engineer chick and Jake and how he made her cry or whatever, but they didn't really develop their relationship anywhere. And I'm not saying it had to be a romantic relationship, keep it friendly, whatever, but do something with it. They didn't do anything with it. So the whole episode was just a waste of time. I mean, I don't think it's one of the worst things ever, because there were some interesting parts to it that kept my attention, but it's not a good episode. Okay, here we are. We have finally arrived. I have been teasing this episode forever as the worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise, and that is Prophet and Lace. Now, after watching it recently, because I really wanted to know, really wanted to examine and analyze and be very, give a lot of careful thought to whether or not I actually believe that this is, in fact, the worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. And I'm actually kind of split, to be honest, because then there's the end game. And then there's also the fight from Voyager, which is the fight that puts up a good fight for worst episode. Although, again, with the fight, that's so bad it's good. I take enjoyment about how awful that episode is. This episode is it's the hardest to watch. That's probably why I would say I called it the worst episode of the Star Trek franchise, because I've probably seen this episode the least, because I don't want to put myself through having to watch this episode. So I think I've only seen it 3 or 4 times, which you might think, wow, 3 or 4 times only? But come on, I'm a geek. I've seen all the other Deep Space Nine at least 20. I've seen Into Pale Moonlight 50 times. Sorry, I'm a geek. But anyway, Prophet and Lace. So I really wanted to pay attention to it. And there are, the driving storyline of Zek being outed as Grand Nagus because he wants to make progressive moves towards helping Ferengi females and doing some reforms. That was interesting, and how Brunt took over as acting Grand Nagus. And the joke that every time they said Grand Nagus, everyone had to say acting. That is okay. It was kind of funny. And it was sort of an interesting storyline. But that's all I can say about it. The rest of it was total and complete and utter cringeworthy shite. First of all, even when I was younger, I always didn't really care for these cross-dressing comedies. I didn't really find them all that amusing because mainly they play off of gender stereotypes. Like, they have men exaggerating, like, female stereotypes to say, oh, isn't it funny that he's acting like a woman? And so they have to exaggerate the female stereotypes. So the ironic thing about this episode is how incredibly sexist it is while trying to tell a story about women gaining equal rights. So that's very ironic to me. But it's not just like calling out the female stereotypes, but also I think this episode didn't really age well. And this is something I actually didn't consider that much before, because you don't really have to get into this to say how much this episode sucks, because this episode sucks for many other reasons. Like, the comedy doesn't work. It is not funny. It's just cheesy. It's cringe. It actually, as I said, painful to watch. It was not put together very well. It's not acted very well. It's definitely not written, because even like the main storyline of Brunt, like a lot of the different like parts of it were like just like Brunt trying to take over as Grand Nagus, like even that came off as haphazard and like just hastily written, and not enough effort was put into it. But alright, so let me get into this. So this episode starts off with Quark hitting on one of his Daba girls and saying, oh, everyone likes you, you're so great, you're a great employee, but you're not making me happy because you have to give me Umox. Now, it's funny how much Deep Space Nine will try to downplay Umox. Umox is essentially a hand job, basically. But it seems like, because you had episodes where Jadzia would just give Quark Umox in front of everyone to try to entice him to do something. And if you think about how would that play if he started giving him a hand job in front of everyone just to entice him to do something, like, it really makes you rethink how they're using Umox in the show. But anyway, regardless, so Quark wants her to give him Umox. So he gives and says, I'm going to fire you if you don't give me Umox. Now, they did deal with Quark sexually harassing double girls in season 1, and like the second or third episode, and she went to Cisco, and Cisco's like, no, this is bullshit, I'm putting a stop to this right now, he can't do that. So why is he still doing it like 6 years later? And plus the show already dealt with this, so why didn't we... And plus this is... Now, it's just... Okay, so... Alexander Siddig, who plays Bashir, directed this episode. And the convention, someone sent me a link to the convention, and he talked about how when he directed this episode, he directed it as a serious, like, dark drama. And the producers were very unhappy with that, because the writer thought of it as a silly comedy. He thought it was the funniest thing he ever written, and Alexander Siddig is like, well, I didn't see it as funny. I didn't think it was funny. And I gotta agree with him on this one. It wasn't funny. But anyway, so they tried to re-edit and put in like post-production, change what Siddig directed as a serious dark comedy, and they tried to re-edit it to a silly, lighthearted comedy. And that really, I think, I try to keep a lookout this view to notice that. And I don't know if that came across very strong, because Alexander Siddig tried to blame himself. Oh, that's why the episode sucks, because I directed it wrong. No. It was just written poorly. It's not your fault. It doesn't matter how you directed this episode. This episode was a piece of shit to begin with. But the scene in particular, where Quark is trying to convince the Double Girl to give him Umox, I think that's where the mismatch of themes came off the most, because you could tell, I think Siddig saw that scene, saw it for the despicable, disgusting sexual harassment that it was, and how Quark was really a disgusting character in this moment. So that's how the actors played it. They played it like a serious, dire, disgusting, dark moment, and the edit, they tried to make it into this comedy, lighthearted comedy, by throwing in this music. There's a dun 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 dun, like this lighthearted comedic music, and it really clashes. It really makes me think, what the fuck were the post-production thing, the editors, directors, what were they thinking when they tried to think, oh, isn't this so funny? He's trying to get her to give him a hand job, and if she doesn't, he'll fire her. Ha 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 ha! That's so funny, silly Quark. But at the end of the episode, she actually agrees to it as well, which I think is pretty disgusting. And they play that off as a comedy where Quark's like turned her down because now he understood the plight of women after having pretended to be one for a day. But then he's like, what am I thinking? Oh, I'm going to take advantage of this young lady. And they play the lighthearted music. Dun 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 dun. And okay, but that's not even the worst. The worst part is like the when Quark was pretending to be a woman, and that Ferengi, the sluggle cola, which is not the least bit funny, the slimiest cola around. Not a convincing character, not a funny character. Ugh. God. Okay, I'm talking myself into thinking this is the worst episode of the Star Trek franchise again. But anyway, like there's a scene where he's like trying to rape her, Quark, basically, or trying to pretty much like being aggressively trying to have sex with her when she clearly doesn't. And Brunt comes in and says, oh, that's a man. And he's like, oh, that's not a man, it's a woman. And then Quark's like, I'm not a man, and kisses him. And Brunt's like, ooh, has this look of total disgust on his face. Oh my God, two men are kissing. That is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's the look on Brunt's face. So that's what okay, so now we get into homophobia in this episode. It's not just sexist, it's homophobic as well, because it has Brunt being totally disgusted by the fact that two men are kissing. And then Quark has to show his boobs to prove that he's a woman. I don't know. I just don't. Alright, so some of you who may be, a few of you who are watching this may be thinking, oh, you SJW libtard, whatever, who cares about this, is not sexist or homophobic, whatever. Okay, grant you set all this stuff aside, just forget about all that sexist, homophobic stuff. It is still an extremely bad episode. This is the way, and they have Lita come in trying to say, oh, this is how you act like a woman. You sit properly, and say, oh, Rob can act more like a woman than you can, and trying to make fun of him. I don't know. Fuck this episode. Fuck this episode so much. I never want to have to watch this piece of shit. It's just poorly written in every conceivable fashion. And it's just, this is the worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. I have to say, what the fuck were they thinking? Especially, it's so weird because earlier in the season they did Magnificent Ferengi, which was beautiful, it's it's all Ferengi episodes. It's done the absolute best it could possibly do, and then just a few episodes later they do this, which is by far worse than anything they've ever done before. It's just anyway, enough of this fucking episode. Let me get into Times Orphan, or Times Morphine, as the Cynics Corner like to call it. This episode was okay. I don't know. It sucked. There we go. I don't think it's the worst episode ever. It didn't totally suck. I did kind of like the storyline with Molly, and O'Brien, Chief O'Brien and Keiko having to deal with, this weird occurrence where the daughter's this mad woman or whatever. It's I don't know, reminded me a bit of Tarzan sort of thing, or the wild beast or whatever. But I don't know. I don't really see the point of this episode, to be quite honest. It doesn't really seem to fit into the rest of Season 6 or have anything to do with anything. It just seems like, oh, we haven't done anything with Molly and Keiko for a while, so let's have an episode of focus on them. So they come up with this, which is kind of a waste of time, especially like when when Molly gets trapped in this time portal or whatever. And how convenient is it that there's just so they go to a planet, just so happens to be a time portal just lying around in the cave. Whatever. Anyway, so Molly just happens to fall through, and they do all this weird technobabble nonsense to try to get her back, but they fuck up and they get her when she's 18 years old. And then when they bring her back, they're like, oh, well, why don't we just try again? Send her back and try again. And when she was younger, and they're like, oh, but that would kind of erase this woman who she is. I think that was just an excuse to do the plot of the episode, because that's what ends up happening in the end anyway, is that she goes back, she voluntarily. I guess that's a bit different because it was the, 18-year-old Molly's choice to. But did she really understand what was going on? She was just like, Molly, home, whatever. I don't know. It seemed like just an excuse to do the episode. It seemed like the smarter thing would be like, yeah, let's just throw her back. It's like, throw her back and try again. Would have made more sense anyway. But, whatever. Alright, so next let's get into the sound of her voice. Now, this is an episode some people have really loved, and I always thought, well, you're wrong, this episode sucks. But watching it again, I don't think it sucks per se, it's just okay. It's one of those okay episodes. It's, it was kind of interesting character story seeing. And it was good, like having a grounded character story where we see the Defiant crew being more of an ensemble again, and like Chief O'Brien and Cisco and Cassie Yates and Bashir and all them talking to this woman captain who's trapped on the planet and dying. Again, we have the shuttle crash, trapped on the planet cliche, which I'm a bit sick of. But it's kind of interesting to have her, talking to him, and she's very insightful, and their interactions were actually very good. So I think this episode's okay. I did kind of like the character story part of it, and how she brought out the characters. Again, the Season 6 doesn't do time travel very well, because the time travel element where they get there and they find that she was actually dead for 3 years because her messages were traveling through time, it's kind of unnecessary. I don't really see the point of that, to be honest. I mean, why not just have him show up and then be too late and she's dead? Why does it have to be a time travel? And again, like Time's Orphan is another example where time travel is used very poorly in Season 6. So Season 6 should just lay off the time travel. They're not doing it very well. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say about this episode. Like the side plot with Worf, like trying to be a father to Kiriyoshi or whatever, that was a bit boring. I'll be honest, I was not interested in that at all. The main plot, like especially at the end where O'Brien is at the eulogy, or giving a eulogy at the whatchamacallit, funeral or whatever for the captain who died, and he's like, oh, we should cherish each other, and know we've grown apart, but we should really cherish each other's company, because pretty soon, foreshadow, one of us, foreshadow, might not be here, foreshadow. Anyway, that was a bit too obvious for me. But, yeah, so this episode's fine, whatever. Anyway, next and final episode of the season is Tears of the Prophets. The Cynic's Corner, what do you call this? Fear for the Prophets. It's spelled with an F-I-T. Anyway. Yeah, I don't know. This episode is okay. It was kind of exciting. I did like the whole, fight to take over, to actually push into Cardassian space, and the interactions you had between the Romulans, seeing the Romulans' involvement in this war, and Romulan and Martok and Cisco, and how it's like, oh, see those Klingons, every Romulan zoo should have a pair. Like, that was kind of cool. I did like that stuff. And like the, battle sequence was a bit awesome. I think the commentary we get with Damar and Wei saying, oh, it's a good thing we put these things and how they're watching, that is a bit contrived. But I mean, And then you have Dukat show up and want to use the pod race. And this is what I'm talking about, is that they integrate the whole pod race prophet thing into the main story, because it does kind of make sense, where Dukat is like, well, the prophets are the ones who are stopping your reinforcements getting through the wormhole, so let me sick the pod race on them. They're a natural ally because I hate the prophets, and they'll, so they'll kill the prophets, so then you can send your reinforcements. But it doesn't work that way. It just closes off the wormhole entirely, which they kind of had to do, because otherwise Dominion would win the war. I mean, the writers had to do it that way. But I love how they still made it so, like, everything was in dire straits at the end, that the Bajorans were cut off from the prophets, and Cisco, like, just didn't know what to do. Although I did think that the whole, like, cliffhanger of him peeling potatoes on the earth was a bit cheesy. I don't know, I didn't really buy that. But worst thing about this episode was Jadzia's death. I mean, this is one of the most obvious, like, the actor has to leave. Like, even if I had no idea, and I don't think I even knew at the time that the actor wanted to leave, but it was obvious. It's one of those character deaths that's just not done very well, where they just throw it in there because the actor doesn't want to do the show anymore. And my brother and I kept saying, like, what? There's only 1 year of the show left. Why not just tough it out for one more year? But apparently I heard that Terry Farrell did not get along with apparently anyone, but particularly like the producers, and that everyone wanted her out, and she wanted out, and no one wanted her to be there. So even though there was only 1 year of the show left, she just couldn't do it anymore, which is a shame, because it would have been more interesting if she stuck it out for one more year. But yeah, the death was just really out of nowhere. Dukat just shows up and goes and like shoots a beam at her out of nowhere. She just happens. They had to throw in this thing with Kira saying, "Oh, I'll pray for you at the orb," and so to give Jadzia an excuse to go to the orb and pray, and just so she can be there when Dukat comes and spits this thing. And it was just, I think it was worse than the whole Tasha Yar death with armors. To be frank, it was just so contrived and out of nowhere. It was not a very good character death at all. Although I did like the sort of aftermath scene where Worf is like yelling and doing the Klingon death cry or whatever over her body, and Cisco's like talking about how he's lost perspective. Like that was pretty cool, but the actual death itself was kind of just out of nowhere, not done very well. So overall, like, this episode was okay. It was decent. It was a good, fun episode, but could have been better. Anyway, those are all the episodes of Season 6 of Deep Space Nine. So now it is time for me to name the best and the worst episodes of Deep Space Nine Season 6, in my opinion. So first we'll start with the worst, where we have a lot of contenders like Sons and Daughters, One Little Ship, Valiant, and times Orphan. But I definitely have to go with Prophet and Lace. I mean, hands down. As I said, this is probably the worst episode in the entire Star Trek franchise. This episode is just, not only is it like really offensive and outdated, but it's just very poorly written. It's not funny. It's poorly acted. Like, none of the characters make sense. The whole like cliche of having like a man dress up as a woman, and the whole that's so funny, and it's just, it's not funny, and having Quark do it is like, it's cringeworthy. I can't stand this fucking episode. Anyway, now let me get into the best episode of Season 6 of Deep Space Nine, and a lot of contenders for this. There's Rocks and Shallows, Behind the Lines, Sacrifice of Angels, The Magnificent Ferengi. God, a lot of amazing episodes. Far Beyond the Stars, Change of Heart. Yeah, great episodes. But, of course, have to go with In the Pale Moonlight. Again, this is perhaps one of the best. I think I had this as my second best or third best in the entire Star Trek franchise. So you talk about, this is weird, the highs and lows. Like, Prophet and Lace has the worst Star Trek franchise, and In the Pale Moonlight. This is one of the best of the Star Trek franchise. It's weird. I think, yeah, but In the Pale Moonlight, again, it's just perfect. It comes together perfectly. Like Andrew Robinson's amazing in this episode. Just the way that it follows the story is so intense. It's a fake. Amazing. Anyway, so my rating for Season 6 of Deep Space Nine as a whole is a 10 out of 10. The best, as I said, perhaps one of the best seasons of all Star Trek, despite the fact that it did have some subpar episodes. Like it had the worst episode, Prophet and Lace, had some other bad episodes like Valiant and One Little Ship, but it had a lot of mediocre episodes, a lot of episodes that were just okay, like Sound of Her Voice, Inquisition, and was it the Statistical Probability one? Yeah, like those are okay. It had a lot of those okay middling episodes as well, but it had like a lot of on-point episodes that were amazing. Like some of the best. Like there were so many episodes I rated at 10 out of 10 in this season. It's like probably much more so than almost any other season I've seen. You got In the Pale Moonlight, you got the Magnificent Ferengi, you got Behind the Lines, you got Sacrifice of Angels. I mean, you got Far Beyond the Stars. There's Change of Heart. I mean, so many amazing episodes that did everything just right. And when they were on point, they were really on point. And like even the middling episodes were better than middling episodes of other seasons, I have to say. Like this season never dipped as far in quality as some of these other seasons. So this, season may be the very best season of Deep Space Nine, perhaps one of the best of the entire Star Trek franchise. Anyway, that is it for my review of Season 6 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I'll be back here in about a month to cover Season 7 of Deep Space Nine, so make sure to check that out. Also check out my channel as I do many more videos on other shows, like other Star Trek videos as well as I do other shows as Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Lost, Discovery, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.